also from the other countries also. So this is such an important topic. I think everybody is connected with real estate, whether it's an individual, whether it's a company, whether you are a banker, or whether you are anybody who is there, a person. Everybody is connected with real estate, either maybe in the form of residential real estate or commercial real estate. So this is, I think, sector where everybody need to know that what is happening in this sector, what are the various funding options, and what are the challenges, and all these things are there. And you see, this is the sector which is, I think, having the largest employment in the country also. So again, I think it is helping the employment in our country. So this sector is, I think, in the difficult phase some years actually, and you see there were some challenges which the people have faced, and there were challenges of the project could not be delivered. There were some challenges about some developers could not come meet out their commitment, and all these challenges were there. But on the other side, there were challenges of the funding to the developer, because there are some guidelines as per the RBI for the banks. Banks cannot fund certain projects or certain aspects of the project cost. This is one of the area. Then there are some other guidelines are also there. So keeping in mind, we thought, let us organize a webinar where everybody can come and discuss that what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, and what are the funding options for the real estate actually. So I would like to congratulate and welcome to all the panelists who are part of this panel. And we have very diverse panel actually. If you see, there are 4 or 5 pillars of funding in the real estate or maybe in any sector. So we have senior bankers with us. The largest bank, CGM, Sri Mahesh Goyal ji, here with us. So Mahesh Goyal ji, the in charge of the entire housing real estate sector of the SBI. So welcome Mahesh ji for joining with us. And then we have Mr.
Thank you.
Yes Gupta. Yes, thank you, sir. Sir, Yes Gupta. So Yes Gupta is having very vast experience of real estate. He was part of one real estate fund. Now he's in his own consultancy business where he's doing a lot of real estate transactions, and he has very good experience in real estate. So he's practically he has seen both the side. On the fund side also, now he's working as a joint venture partner, operator. So it will help us to know that from which point of view what is the real estate situation. So welcome, Yasji, and thank you very much for joining with us.
Thank you,
Then
Ashish.
we have Ms. Gitanjali. Gitanjali is MD of JM Financial Credit Solutions Limited,
Recording in progress.
which is a NBFC. So Gitanjali has very vast experience of real estate from the NBFC point of view, from the alternate funding point of view. So Gitanjali ji, thank you very much for joining with us. We will understand from you what kind of options are available for real estate, what are the points, what are the areas which are to be addressed by the developer when they are approaching to the lenders and all. So thank you very much. And we have
Thank you.
thank you. We have Mr. Amit Goenka ji. Amit Goenka ji will join us, I think, little late because he has some other engagement. So he will join at 5 p.m. So, but Amit ji is also having very vast experience. He's running a AIF along with the Dalmia Group, and he has seen all sides of the business also. So he'll speak on the AIF point of view, what the AIFs are looking, and how the AIFs can fund to the real estate sector, what structures, what kind of this thought process. So be a very good panel where we have bank, we have NBFC, we have fund, and we have somebody who is working as operator, developer, and having the experience of the fund also. So I think we have covered all aspects of the funding point of view. And if you see, very recently I was seeing reading the newspaper. So there was an announcement by the housing secretary that the real estate sector will reach something around $1 trillion by 2030. So that's the hope which has come from the top actually, and it will be the, I think it will employ something 11 or 12 crore of people in the real estate sector. So if you see after pandemic, there are some challenges in various sectors. So the real estate was also impacted. And if you see, because the real estate is impacted, then definitely the other sectors are also impacted. So whether cement, steel, or the other sectors, whether the other areas of the building construction. So everybody is impacted. The real estate sector is not doing well, or if there are challenges in the real estate sector. So it is very important for the everybody, whether the government or the regulator or the banks and the other agencies who are part of the ecosystem, to ensure that the required flow of funding should be available to the developers, so that they can deliver the project and on time, and ultimately the country, whatever the requirement is there, whether it's a real estate, residential or commercial, it can be meet out, and this can help to the grow the other sectors also. So that is from my side, and I would like to run a small PPT which can give you some kind of idea that how the real estate sector going further, and what are the different options in the real estate sectors. So is this visible to everybody? Okay, thank you. So, friends, this is the asset class real estate. So we see that residential, commercial, industrial, retail, hospitality, SEZ, land, schools, hospitals. So practically all these are the part of the real estate industry. Then we have the investor class. So banks are having the larger exposure to the real estate sector. Then housing finance companies are also equally helping the real estate sector in the funding. Then private equity investors like AIF and all. Insurance companies are also involved into the funding to the real estate to some extent. Pension funds, NBFC, HNI, landowners, public market investors, so FII, MF, and retail. So this is the overall ecosystem from the investors' point of view. So these kind of investors are there. Those are helping the real estate industry by providing the funding. These are the key drivers for demand. So I think it's a very good sign that this economic growth and the urbanization and the smaller family size and the rising income, these are the four key ingredients for the growth of the real estate sector. So economic growth, we have seen that I think last one and a half years, because there is a situation where in many places the country lockdown, and in spite of it, we have seen that there is a demand in the real estate. So that is good actually, and the government is also supporting in many ways by bringing the industrial corridors and the boosting the manufacturing sector by PLI scheme and all. So this will definitely help to boost the demand of the real estate sector. And then another urbanization. So it is there actually, if you see every year 1 crore people are moving from the semi-urban and rural areas to urban cities. So it is also increasing the demand of the real estate sector. And these urban cities are contributing a lot in the GDP of the country, and that is expected by 2030 there will be 75% GDP will come from the urban cities actually. And the smaller family, the nuclear families are also actually helping to grow the demand of the real estate sector. So as per the estimate, the size of the household will decrease from 4.8 to 4.4 packs actually. And the rising income levels of per capita income, the country, it is estimated that it will reach to something around 8,300 USD by 2028. So whenever the per capita income is increasing, there is also a demand is coming from the people for the purchasing real estate assets. These are the government initiatives. So the FDI, the government has done many relaxations in the FDI to attract investment, either in defense, building townships, and housing and infrastructure. The triple P initiatives in the infrastructure sectors. Next. Then the central port authorities have also bring out some relaxations which will help to grow the port sectors. And the NIIF, National Investment Infrastructure Fund, is helping the infrastructure. RERA is one of the, I think, the major, thing in the entire real estate this thing. So after RERA, there's a lot of confidence has built up actually. So this is I think very good step from the government, and the RERA is helping to boost the confidence and to bring the transparency in the system. Next. Then these are the some of the emerging, I think, steps which have been taken by the government. So affordable housing, housing for all, boosting the demand, the affordable housing sector. A lot of demand is coming. And then 100 smart cities, which is already there, and out of that, 60 are already been approved. Then see the transit-oriented development (TOD). So where this will be along with the transit-oriented development, there will be the residential development also. Then 6 industrial corridors also is helping to grow the demand in the real estate sector. Next. So these are various funding options. So private equity is one of the options, the form of FDI, where a lot of money has come already and a lot of money is changing to India. Then the strategic partnership, this is another form of real estate funding. So when at the land stage, the owner and the developers are partnering to develop jointly in collaboration. So this is helping for the developers to incur less cost in the project, and they can develop more projects with less money. Then the construction finance is another form of funding where most of the funding are coming from the banks for construction finance and the BFC. Then the structured and mezzanine funding also is the form of quasi debt or quasi equity. Next. So bank bulk inventory sale also is one of the area where the developers are selling the bulk inventory at one go, and then they are getting funding to complete the other projects also. And capital corporate level financing, some of the corporates are also funding to the real estate projects from their corporate balance sheet. Then core asset sale. So sometimes the core asset sale is also another way of getting money for the future development. Public market, the IPO, one of the I think another area. REITs also has come also, which can help in the getting the money in the project. ECB, as I already discussed, private equity in the form of FDI, the debt in the form of ECB, which is coming. Then the receivable discounting is also another way of funding. Next. So this is the funding life cycle, the project life cycle. So starting from the land stage, there are many options where the mezzanine funding kind of situation can be there, or the joint development agreement or the JDA can happen where the developer and the landowner can come together. Then the early project stage when the approvals are required and all can be other stage of funding. The construction stage, late project stage, completed project stage, and the surplus liquidity. So these are some of the phases of funding the entire life cycle of the funding of any project in the real estate sector. Next. So these are the sources of investment, as already discussed. So developers equity, initially the major source of funding is the developer equity, and then the private investors, forum FPIs, commercial banks, and the infra fund for the infra project. So these are some multilateral agencies are also funding the effect at the real estate or the project in construction, the effect side. And see, so practically, if we see, there are 3 phases: in initiation and planning and implementation, and the closing basically. So practically, if we see the project cost also, the initial stage is something around 5 to 15%. The second phase implementation is up to 85% cost is involved, and the closing stage is 5 to 10%. So major funding is required in the implementation stage. So that I discussed already, these are the different funding options. So pre-construction, construction, and operational stage. So these funding options will come in the different stages. Next. So these are the sources, the agencies who are helping or who are funding to the real estate sector. So banks, FIs, HFCs, NBFC, private lending, private funds, and the mezzanine structures by the foreign investment. And REITs is a new, I think, trend in the entire real estate funding space. So the REIT actually the operational assets can be funded on. Next. So construction finance, the corporate loan, lease rental discounting. So these are the different form of the financing of the real estate. Next. So these are the key considerations when any lender any fund is looking to fund any of the project. So the business background, the market, what is the market actually? So they are seeing that in which market this is a project, what is the demand, how this will grow further and all. So this is another parameter, the financial parameter, the viability of the project, security aspects. So what kind of security will be available? The technical parameter, whether all approvals are in place, whether other technical aspects are completed, like environment, plan approval, and all the, and the ultimately the project cash flow. So how the project cash flow will come. That is another aspect whenever any lender is or any investor is considering funding the project. Next. So these are technical, title, license, building plan, and the number of units and other details, statutory approval, and then the construction schedule, what is the current status. So these are the part and parcel of the any project appraisal. Next. So project cash flow, these are the major ratios. Okay. So break-even analysis is basically very important when any lender is looking that whenever the break-even will happen. What is the stage when the break-even will be there for the project, so that the project can generate some surplus. Then the sensitivity analysis is all there basically. So there are some factors which are impacting the cash flow of the project. So like whatever the price that they estimated in terms of sale price of per unit or per square feet. So the lender always looking that there should be some kind of sensitivity analysis where if the price will be less than 10% of, then what will be the situation, whether project will sustain or project will be in a position to complete. Then there can be the demand factor also, which can be another area of sensitivity analysis, whether whatever the demand has been projected in terms of selling of the units and all, whether it will be meet out or there will be some factors which will impact the demand. So this sensitivity analysis will give you some fair idea that it is the situation and how the cash flow will be impacted. And the net cash flow also will be very important to see. And the repayment schedule, that is an important area where any lender will see that how the repayment will come and whether this project will be in a position to repay the money according to the schedule. So these are the areas, and the debt equity ratio, debt coverage ratio is another area. So yes, some of the I think cash flow ratios which we have defined, but there are many other ratios are there which will be seen by the prospective lenders. Next. So this is one form of lending basically. So some cases the real estate projects are funded in the form of working capital, where there is a charge on the assets basically. So this we will discuss basically this real estate funding, the project funding is basically working capital funding or is it term loan funding, or it's a working capital in the form of term loan. And in this case, the rate of interest is generally charging between 12 to 15% if it is through bank. Right? Loan against property is a very prevalent, I think, product of the banks, the NBFCs, where they are funding against the property, and the tenure can go maybe up to 15 years or more than that also. And the different kind of interest rates are charged by the different lenders, and the underlying assets is the security for that funding. Next. So private equity by domestic fund, so like Nisha see the domestic fund actually, where Amit Goenka will speak about that. So private equity funds are very active in the country since last, I think, 15 years, and they are doing structured transactions, and they are helping the developer to come at the join hands at the initial stage also. These are some of the private equity funds, or the basically private funds. Those are helping the developers. So ICICI, IDFC, HDFC, Motilal Oswal, Kotak, India REIT. So some names we have given. There may be some other names also. So like this, there are other names also. Those are already those have already funded to real estate sector, and they are also looking to fund the future real estate projects. So I think we have so Goenka, we will be in a better position to give the fund perspective. And mutual fund also have been allowed to fund to some extent to the real estate project, and they have very set guidelines for funding of the real estate project basically. So they can directly fund the real estate properties also, and they can come out with the schemes for the equity shares, and they can also invest in the debt instrument of the real estate sector. Next. So this is all about the real estate and a little bit about the Resurgent India. So Resurgent India is SEBI registered category for merchant bank, and we are ISO certified also. And we are into various activities where we provide solutions for debt fund, debt syndications, and the private equity, and the structure financing, the valuations, PV study, and these are the some of them we have fintech companies also. So we have Pan India presence, 15 years of experience, and 250-member team. So this is all from my side about the real estate sector. So just to give you the basic idea about the various funding options, various the funding agency, and what kind of the instruments are there in the market. So it will give some idea, but we have the veteran from the industry, so they will be in a better position to give us the complete outlook about the different funding options in the real estate sector. So we have Sri Mahesh Goyalji, CGM Housing in the State Bank of India, and he the person who is I think having the I think portfolio of more than 5 lakh crore as of today. So I think the largest one in the country actually. So he is aware about the entire pulse of the industry, the real estate sector, from the individual point of view, from the developer point of view, and from the government view also. I think he'll be very much aware that how the government is looking to I think support this sector actually. So Mahesh Goyalji is the veteran in the banking, and before this taking this charge, he was the CGM of Patna Circle, which is a very difficult terrain actually if I see from Indian point of view actually. So Bihar actually banking actually very tough there. So he took the charge, and he did a lot of innovations, a lot of changes in during his tenure actually, and he was heading this Patna, Bihar and the Jharkhand, both the states. And Mahesh Goyalji is having I think very good interest in the various areas. So he has I think deliberated in the Corona Jung, the Doordarshan, how bank can show a path on prosperity post COVID-19. So very positive actually on many areas, and I think he believes in the ideology also, and he is a motivational speaker. So we will definitely have this opportunity sometime to listen from him on the motivational side also. But today our topic is basically real estate, I think, which is his subject. So Maheshji, so first of all, thank you very much for joining with us. So we would like to understand from you, because you are representing the largest bank of the country, and you know that the entire real estate sector. So we would like to understand what is the SBI take on the real estate sector in terms of funding to the developers, and whenever you are looking to fund to any developer, what kind of schemes which you are already having, and what kind of schemes you are thinking to come out in this COVID era actually, so that developers can complete their project. So we know that there is a fund called Swami Fund, which is running separately by the SBI cap, or I think already, which is funding the stress asset projects, basically the projects which are in stress. But I hope that I believe that in SBI, State Bank of India, you are looking at the fresh projects where the funding can be given and these can be completed. So we would like to understand from you, from the SBI point of view, your outlook and the different schemes and the different stages of funding also. So over to you, Maheshji.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ashish. Good evening to all, and my gratitude to Team Resurgent India for inviting me for this deliberation. And I'm sure all of us, the bankers, the financial institutions, the NBFCs, and the ultimate users are going to be benefited from this discussions. As far as State Bank of India is concerned, it's not a new name for anyone. And as Mr. Ashish said that we have 5 trillion of rupees exposure. It's one of the largest exposure in our book. Around 23% of our total exposure is in real estate. And real estate, when you talk about it, consists of mainly of individual housing finance and also to the builder finance. At times we are giving for CRE, commercial real estate also, like for shopping mall and all that. That is also covered in this. But our main focus is in for individual housing finance, where it comes to around 80 to 90% of our total exposure. And in fact, if you see about 10 years back or about 15 years back, there was no demand for builder finance. And the main reason was there were a lot of investors who would invest even before the launch of the project. And there was a time, I remember that time I was there in Ahmedabad, just one launch was there and all the flats which are going to be built in next 4 or 5 years are booked already. And the builder was having sufficient cash in his hand for to take care of the entire project for future. And he was not approaching to the bank. But after introduction of RERA, that the money received for the particular project can be invested in that same project and cannot divert it to some other project. So there is a little check on this thing, and builders are approaching to banks also for financing. As far as financing for the builders for the purpose of construction is concerned, it's very simple. First is the land. We always presuppose that land is already owned by the builder. Generally, we don't finance for the purchase of land. Land is already bought by him. And when we finance for the purpose of project cost, we consider the transacted value or the documented value of the land, not the market value. Because at times, if you see somebody has bought the land in say 10 crores, for the purpose of stamp duty, he has undervalued the property. And when it comes to the valuation or the market value of that property, it is at times is more than 2 times also, more than 3 times also, more than 200% to 300% also. So, as a prudent banker, as a government banker, we cannot be part of evasion of stamp duty. We cannot be part of anything which is not ethical. So, we always consider the value which has been shown in the documents. That's number one. Second is when any builder starts a project, you always expect that some booking will be there and you will get the advance from the prospective buyers. So that advance is also part of the funding. And at times that advance is quite high. If the project is of say a small number of units, say 30, 40 units or 50 units, then at times they get almost 30 to 40% of the advance, and all the units are get booked, depending on the reputation of the builder. That I've seen in Ahmedabad, like there were many small builders, those who were making towers of 10-story tower of 4 flats is to 40 flats. That was very common there. 40 flats tower, one tower of 40 flats. And all the 40 flats would get booked within 1 month of the launch, and they will get some extra, some advance, and that remaining payment from the buyers was linked to the constructions. So the builders were never in need of money from the bankers. Whatever the investment was there from the builder side, that was only for the purpose of purchase of land. That's all. But when we go for funding, the project cost is on one side, the cost of the land, and also the total project which is going to be there for the purpose of construction. Suppose the 100 crore is the project cost of a typical medium size or small size housing unit. So 30 crore is the land or 70 crore is the construction, and it's a 10-story building. So what we presuppose is that land is already bought by the customer, by the borrower, by the builder, and now he is booking and he is getting some advance. So whatever is the gap of the finance where he needs the money, the 30% should be made up good by the builder, and 70% bank can go for the financing of that. And if the total requirement of the builder is more than 50 crores, then we go for ECR, external commercial rating, and preferably it should be BBB, investment grade. And our rate of interest are also linked to the ECR. Suppose better the ECR, lower the rate of interest. We are financing this our share in the form of term loan also. If it is more than 3 years, then it is term loan. If it is to be repaid within 36 months, then we call it either demand loan or cash credit. So it is up to the borrower what type of requirement he wants. In case of demand loan, the repayment is to be paid over a period of 36 months with the reduction of DP every month. And in case of when the borrower is expecting that he is going to get at the fag end of the project, say at the end of 3 years, the lump sum amount, then he can utilize that account as a cash credit also. Okay. So that is up to the borrower. As far as the market is concerned, as on date, the corona has taught us one very good thing, that is work from home. And as a result, there is a huge demand for bigger houses. And especially in category 2 cities. Like now it's not necessary that I should be in Mumbai or Delhi for my work. If I am staying somewhere, say around 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers away from Delhi or Mumbai, and getting a house at the 25% of the cost of what I'm paying here in Mumbai or Delhi, why not you stay over there? Because my work is getting done from there also. All the things are available, better connectivity is there, then I can do my work very well from there. So there, like small towns, like if I talk about UP, there's a huge demand in the houses near Haridwar, near Nainital. All these exotic or so-called hilly areas where the people can enjoy, there is no pollution, and also approachable by road, and also the airport is not very far. So suppose they want to come to Delhi or Mumbai, so airport is hardly 4 or 5 hours from that particular place. And there they can afford not only flat but also bungalow. So I've seen many of the builders are rushing to that side and making big flats. Big flats in the sense in the range of say 3,000 square feet or 4,000 square feet, and providing all facilities over there. The cost of that 3,000, 4,000 square feet house is 25% of the house which is available in Delhi or nearby Delhi. So similar things are happening nearby Chennai also, nearby Bangalore also, nearby Hyderabad also. And it's good for the country also as a whole, like you are not wasting your time in traveling. There's a huge cost involved in the offices. There is no requirement to maintain the offices now. You can work from home. Like I tell the example of which I have seen the project. There was a project which is coming near Parichok in Noida, Greater Noida. So in that project, what the builder had done, there is a golf in between, and surrounding the golf, there he has made houses. Beautiful. And what he has done, he has made row houses, though he's calling it bungalows. It's not bungalow. These are row houses, and the top of the row house, the 3-story, top of the row house is office. Very scenic beauty from the office. One side is golf, other side tall buildings, and fresh air. Like you can enjoy sitting in the home as if you are sitting somewhere in high-rise office in Delhi or in Mumbai, and that's very cheap rate compared to what you get in office in Delhi or Mumbai. And also the leisure of working from home, you are not in a hurry to move out at 1 hour early and all that. So what I want to say that there is a huge demand for these type of residences which are going to be utilized for the purpose of residence come offices. So, and in fact, if you see, April and May was bad when the second phase of COVID was there. After June, there is a huge demand in the houses, and this is the only sector, real estate sector, which is growing. There is a lesser demand in the consumption. Like if I talk about the State Bank of India, we have 2-3 types of loan. One is for SME, one is the large advances, then SME advances, then personal segment advances, which is for consumption mainly, and real estate advances. So consumption advances, because nobody is going out for leisure trip, for LFC, for STC, home travel, leave fare concession and all that. And for tourist places, that has come down. And also, people are not spending much on their clothes and all, like buying, the consumptions. So where the money, the spare money is to be invested. So the best investment as on date in the hands of the people, those who are having surplus money, especially professionals, the salaried class, which are high-end salaried class, and also businessmen, they are investing mostly in houses, residential properties. And I've seen like the families are becoming smaller and smaller. Earlier, there used to be a house where 5, 6, 7 people are seven family members were staying. Now, if suppose one person is having 4 sons, he would like to have 4 houses for his 4 sons. So that number is also the demand is also increasing that way also.
Right, sir. I think, sorry to interrupt you in between, sir. Basically, I think you have very well covered with the example also that what kind of funding can be available to the developer from SBI. So you have given that up to 50 crore. I think there is no external rating is required, and above 50 crore there is a requirement of external rating also. So that,
yes.
Yeah. So that is one part of the this thing. But there are many aspects of funding. So, the security is one of the aspects, and you see the cash flow. So if you can cover some part
So
on
from
that
bank,
also.
Definitely. From bank point of view, the most important aspect of funding to a builder is the technical, which you said, na, all the approvals must be there on record. Like we cannot finance any project which is not approved by RERA, which is not approved by the local administration, and somebody is getting approval for the 7-story building and making 10-story building. If there is the FSI, somebody is misutilizing FSI, there is space for parking getting utilized for increasing the flats or for some other purpose. So all these type of things, bank would not appreciate any point of time. Whatever is the approval is there, bank would like to finance for that only. That's number one. So all the approval should be there on record.
Okay.
And then for sustainability project also, bank has come out with a scheme where the rate of interest concession is there. And if somebody is there in the affordable housing, then also bank considers, though there is no separate scheme for affordable housing, but bank considers for concession in rate of interest for these type of projects. Security is the entire project is secure to the bank, mortgage to the bank, and bank will release one by one when he's selling the houses, the borrower is selling the houses, one by one bank is releasing and getting the repayment. Bank is ensuring that that much amount is deposited in the account.
So, sir, are you asking the
bank that loan?
Sir, is there any requirement other than the project security, the construction project? Because many times the developers are hesitating to go to the bank because they are having this thing in the mind that the bank will ask the collateral security or some additional security from us. So is this right or?
No, that's what I'm saying. In the initially, I said that if the 30% of the total deficit is financed by the banker, then bank will not ask for the project for the additional collateral.
Okay.
Because already the land is there, which is free. That will be mortgaged, and the entire project which is coming up, that will also be mortgaged. Because land and the building cannot be separated. So whatever is coming up on that land which is mortgaged to the bank, that is part and parcel of that land only. So that is also mortgaged to the bank in. So not necessary that there should be a separate collateral.
And suppose any builder any developer want to apply for loan. So there is any specific cell or they have to approach to the particular branch, or they can go to anywhere, any branch, or they can submit the project?
Earlier we were having a specific cell for sanction. Now the power has been decentralized and it has been centralized. It has been given to the branch. There is a committee. Depending on the amount of the loan, there is a regional office trade committee, there is a zonal office trade committee, there is a circle level trade committee. And if it is beyond the circle level trade committee, say it is beyond 50 crores or so, then it comes to the corporate center. There is a committee of regional credit committee.
Okay.
And then beyond that also, it's all gets sanctioned. There are committees, different committees for sanctions. So that is not an issue. That is all internal only. But the proposal is to be submitted to the branch. And the branch should be fairly large. I would say, suppose it's a scale 4 branch, then the branch manager should be able to take up that.
Okay.
Or the branches which are handling SME advances, they can take care of these type of builder finance also.
Okay. Great, sir. That's a good information, I think, because we have many developers who are already here in
Yeah,
this
yeah.
webinar.
But
And
I would like
yes,
to
sir.
respond to the developers if they have any query or any approaching to State Bank of India is always apprehensive. क्या होगा, सुनेंगे नहीं सुनेंगे. But I would like to say
Correct,
bank is changing. It's not like that. 10 years back, what bank was there, it's not the same now.
So that's a great confidence, sir, which you have given to the developer community.
Thank you.
Because many developers are the part of this webinar. They have directly joined on this Zoom link, and they are also listening on the YouTube and other channels, also social media channels.
Okay.
So this message definitely will spread, and then people will approach you a large number for the construction funding of the developer community. So thank you very much. I think you have given a lot of insights about SBI. So I'll come back to you again, sir. And now we have Mr. Yash
Sure.
Gupta. Yash Gupta, thank you, sir. Yash Gupta ji, the founding partner of the ByGR. This company is into the investment, development, technology, and advisory platform. But he has very good experience of running a AIF, the fund, the name of Heinz India. So he was senior managing director, and he has seen, I think, both the sides of the real estate business. And I think he has a lot of I think things which he has done in his career. He was with the consulting firm also. So first of all, thank you, ESG, for joining with us. And I think we would like to understand from you. One, I think technology is very exciting, which you have written. So technology, one of the area which we need to understand. And what are the newer models are coming for the funding in the real estate sector. So, and how the ByGR is helping the developer or maybe the industry overall. So, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you, Ashish ji, and thank you, Resurgent, for inviting me to the panel. It is my honor and pleasure to be here. Though I have to say it is very, very difficult to follow Mahesh Goyal ji with his 5 trillion rupee book to talk about real estate for anyone, but I will try. My experience in real estate is now almost 2 decades. I started off after McKinsey and in New York to work with the local developer building residential apartments as well as residential communities around golf, especially as Mahesh talked about. My first project was a 100-acre golf community with the row houses around it, which did very well even then. And then I started and ran for many years Heinz in India, which is the largest real estate development company in the world and one of the top 5 asset managers in the world with almost 130, 140 billion of assets under management, under which we managed several funds. Though we invested both in residential and commercial, our focus was from a development point of view more in commercial, and we are best known for our iconic assets in Gurgaon, like One Horizon Center, which I was fortunate to be a part of the team that built those assets. Our focus now after leaving Heinz as at ByGR continues to be in commercial real estate. Though we have experience in residential and we have looked at it, we like to focus in commercial real estate for specifically the reason that Mahesh talked about, which is how because there is work from home as an option today for people, and we do think there is a certain percentage, whether it is 15%, 20%, 25%, the number varies depending on who you talk to and which part of the world you're in. But there is a percentage of people who will work from home. But for the majority of the people, whether that is 70, 75, 80% of the people who will continue to work from the office, there is now suddenly a lot more sensitivity about and particularness about the office building that they come to. The office building is not the same as it used to be. If someone is coming to an office today where they are going to be around many other people, they are very, very particular about hygiene. They're very particular about safety. They're very particular about the experience that they have in the office and how safe they feel. On top of that, when you think of the millennials, when you think of the young workforce that India has, and India has the youngest workforce in the world today, these people not only are particular about safety and hygiene, they're also particular about, is my office cool? Is it an engaging place? Is it a nice social environment? Is it someplace I want to come to necessarily? And what we are focused at ByGR is really on 2 things. One is we are buying office buildings along with private equity partners and local partners and fixing those buildings from grade B assets to grade A assets. And second is we are really focusing on a paradigm which we call feel, that people will come to an office because it feels good. Feel means FEEL, F for flexibility, E for efficiency, E for another E for engagement, and L for location. Now, we have been, at least the buildings I have built till now in my life have all been LEED Platinum. We are also very particular about sustainability, but I think the market still is not as focused from a tenant side on sustainability, or rather very few tenants are focused on sustainability right now. But flexibility, efficiency, engagement, and location are really things that today a customer of office or a tenant in an office or an employee working for a tenant in an office are very, very focused on. Office is very different from residential. In a residential project, the developer first sells and then he makes. A lot of the cash flow, as Mahesh talked about, are often coming from the pre-sales that happen. In India and in some other parts of the world also, that this paradigm of selling offices in strata, like meaning selling small offices in a large commercial building, used to be the standard way of doing things. But we think this will change. And this will change in a manner where the developer will first have to build, and only then can they lease. And after leasing, maybe they will sell. And the reason for this change is, even if you think about your office, about you being a tenant in an office building, where the office is owned in common with many other people, and suppose you want to have the right hygiene standards in the elevator, suppose you want to change the air filtration system, suppose you want to make any improvement in the building to make it more COVID friendly, to make it more engaging, to make it more appreciative of the employee concerns, you can't do that because you don't own the office building. You only own a very small part of the office building. And the reason that there has been a huge flight to quality to institutionally owned office buildings, whether they're owned by Blackstone, Brookfield, DLF, Raheja, or any large office owner like that, people have appreciated that because the entire building is owned by one owner, whether that owner is a fund or whether that owner is an institution or whether that owner is an Indian developer. But that is the first change that we think is happening in the world of office real estate or commercial real estate, is that we think commercial strata owned or strata ownership as a funding option, as a cash flow option, will reduce. It is reducing, but will reduce and almost become zero in the coming years. And we have seen this in every other market. The other big paradigm is, once you own the office is not going to be just an asset business. Office is going to become an operating business. What that means is, it is not about having a great building in a good location. It is really about providing the right experience, the right kind of safety, the right kind of wellness to your employee in the office, such that they want to come to your office building and they feel safe coming to your office building. Only then will the employees be willing not to work from home and to work from the office, which many studies have proven is still more efficient a manner, a more collaborative, more innovative, and more productive way of working than necessarily working from home.
Great, sir. Great. I think you have very well covered those part of the discussion. And this is another way of funding to the developer actually. You see, through this kind of, they can bring the large giants of the world like Brookfield or the Blackstone, and they can jointly develop or maybe some partner. So what if suppose, because there are a lot of developers in the country which are not well known actually, but they want to, they aspire for going such kind of buildings and they want to tie up and all. So what are the solutions for them? How they can find out these kind of large giants and they can join hands and then go further? So
yes,
if you can highlight on that.
Very good question, sir, Ashishji. There are 2-3 ways to do it. My first reaction to this is for any developer who wants to build a commercial real estate, our request to them will be, please don't sell it in strata. If you want to fund the project, apart from the debt options of construction financing and all, you must have enough equity involved in the project. Now, where will the equity come from? The equity can come from two sources. It can come from, as you had very nicely put in your very, very good presentation, which gave all the different options. It can either come from personal sources and private investors. It can come from private equity itself. It can come from Brookfield and Blackstone, where you can do forward contracts, where they will make, if they like your location, if they like your capability, if they like what you're trying to build, they can do a forward contract with you, which basically means it is almost a way of receivable discounting, which is that we will buy the project from you once you build it. And because of that, because of the assurity of an exit, people will be willing to fund it, or they themselves might fund it for you. But our request is, especially given how cyclical real estate is, and most people in India still think real estate is a valuation business, that I will spend 100 rupees and I will sell it for 120 rupees, 150 rupees. We say real estate is not a business of valuation because you can never predict the market, but real estate is a business of liquidity. Can you manage your liquidity well? Can you manage your liquidity through the real estate cycles? Can you manage your liquidity in case there are delays? Because these are very, very high capex investments or very high capex businesses or projects. In that situation, make sure you pay a lot of attention to your debt equity ratio, to your capital structure. There are many, many investors, very sophisticated investors who are in the space today. We are very fortunate to partner with one such investor called DMI, who is not only a very seasoned real estate investor and a very long-term real estate investor, but also a great value add partner, because the investor is not just coming with capital, they're also coming with a lot of competence, capability, and good suggestions on how they can help you improve your project. So our sense is, don't be greedy, or if you want to be greedy, it's okay, but be long-term greedy, not short-term greedy, and capitalize your project with both equity and debt.
Great. So I think this is another way of funding where I think if you tied up for the forward receivables and all, then you can get the funding, timely funding from the domestic sources. And I think their cost will also be less. So I think this is a very, very good tool for the alternative funding source for the real estate sector. Actually.
And what that helps, Ashish ji, and what that helps with for bank funding, for the Maheshis of the world, is when a private equity investor comes to fund with you, they will do a lot of due diligence. They will do a lot of sensitivity analysis, all the things you talked about. They will do a lot of cash flow planning, all the different things you talked about, the discipline you have to bring in to check the viability of project. An equity investor will do much more strongly than even a debt person will sometimes do, because it is equity that is at risk. They don't have the same collateral, they don't have the same recourse that a debt investor has. But what that does is, if you have the right equity partner, that gives a lot of confidence to the banker that A, you have a partner with deep pockets, and B, the partner is sophisticated enough that they have done a lot of the due diligence on both you as a partner, as a developer, as a builder, and on the project for its financial viability. So it actually makes your process of getting debt both easier and potentially cheaper.
Okay, great. So thank you very much. Thank you, Yasji. I'll come back to you again. So now we have Gitanjali, Mr. Gitanjali ji. She's the managing director of GM Financial, and before that she was with ICICI Bank also. She has very good understanding of the real estate funding, the alternative sources of real estate funding, because NBFCs are not going the plain vanilla structure. I think they are doing a lot of structuring whenever the refunding is coming on their table. So we would like to understand, Gitanjali, first of all, thank you very much for joining with us. And GM Financial, I think, is a company which is entirely into real estate funding, mainly to a developer. So you must have seen in last 15 years many examples of many I think structures which have come to you, and you have funded them. So we like to understand from you your experience in the BFC, the real estate sector, and in the current scenario, if any developer is looking to fund this project, what are the avenues available for them, the NBFC space? Because what we have seen in the last 2-3 years, some of the NBFC which were into real estate funding, as a real fact also, which I would like to just highlight, that like a company called Altico, this was into problem, but the company like Gender, Piramal, I think they could not go further. Actually, I think sometimes they have to put the brake on their the further lending and all, but they still JM is doing good actually, and you are still into the business. So we would like to understand the different structures from the NBFC point of view, and generally when you invest or when you take the exposure in the project, what do you see here? So over to you, and thank you very much.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, Ashish ji. So I think given that I started off with ICICI Bank, I think I related very much with what Mahesh ji was saying as to what banks generally look at with regards to funding a real estate project. NBFCs aren't really very different. I think we are also looking at very similar things with regards to the kind of security we look at, the kind of background, the kind of collaterals that we need to fund real estate projects. But having said that, we have a lot more regulatory flexibility, which banks don't have. Banks are regulated a lot more by RBI. They have a lot more regulations to follow in terms of that they can't fund, like Mahesh said, they can't fund for land. They can't fund for acquisition of a project. They need to have all approvals in place, which is actually a very prudent way of lending in any case. However, being an NBFC, we are not governed by a lot of these regulations. So we can come in at any cycle of the life cycle of the project, from land acquisition to construction funding to mezzanine funding, where you actually have a senior lender, which may be a bank, and you can give a loan which is on a second charge on a project. There are various options available to us and various structures through which we can lend. However, we do have certain regulations which govern us as far as RBI is also concerned. So unlike what Amit would be talking about, which is on the AIF space, we do need to have a regular running coupon. We do need to have some interest payments which are built in on a regular basis, because the model of an NBFC is that of, apart from the equity that we have, we borrow and we lend money, right? So that is predominantly how the NBFC model works. So having said that, I'll just tell you a little bit about how NBFCs, in the last decade, what has happened. So I think before 2010, I think there were barely any NBFCs who were funding to the real estate sector. There were only banks who were relevant in this space. But from 2011 onwards, the last one decade has actually seen a lot of NBFCs spring up. A lot of NBFCs looking at, and it's actually been a decade where a lot of new developers started venturing into the sector across geographies. So this period has seen a lot of new NBFCs come in, and a lot of large new NBFCs come in. We've seen a lot of business houses like Aditya Birla Group, like L&T Finance, all of these guys actually starting a new real estate lending book, because everybody thought that, yes, this is a sector where it's a cash generating business. You give money to people, it makes you 4 to 5% spread in most cases, and it's a very, very liquid business. So seeing all of those, I think a lot of people grew their balance sheets in the sector. So I think it was a good time to do that. I still feel that the NBFC business is a great business to be in spite of the few names that you took. However, I think the most prudent thing, which is important from an NBFC perspective, apart from what kind of projects we are underwriting, is actually the liability side. Because like I said, unlike banks, we borrow money and we lend money. And that is where some organizations which you named went wrong. Because when the IL&FS crisis happened, a lot of the ALM mismatch happened, and people were not able to meet their liabilities, which were scheduled, which may be shorter term than the asset life, which is generally longer as far as a real estate asset is concerned. It's generally 3 to 5 years. So that mismatch caused the problem. But I think for me now, I'm just going to focus on the asset underwriting part of it as to how do we evaluate real estate transactions. So for us, I think the biggest and the most important thing is how we onboard clients. I think for that is the first criteria, right? As to whether the person has completed at least 1 million square feet of development, the person has had at least 10 years of experience, and he has had the ability to build what he's aspiring to build, whether he has done that in the past. So these are the few checks which we do before we even onboard our client for our first transaction. Also, the track record of the developer as to how has he behaved with other financial institutions in the past. Today, there are lots of softwares available by which you actually know whether the client is reported SMA1, SMA2, or an NPA at any point in time, during when the business was run. So those are the primary checks which we do. Apart from that, when I come to the kind of projects we look at, I think we at JM have predominantly, and I think most NBFCs have been lending to only the residential real estate sector. So I think 85% of our book would be residential real estate. Though residential real estate is a quick churning as far as you underwrite it correctly, where you have to evaluate certain aspects of the project before you lend to that. One being obviously the most important being the location of the project, the micro market which you're actually lending in, the kind of brand you're lending to, the name of the developer, because we have seen across the cycles, sales do happen in residential real estate. During the worst time, sales happen. And of course, the 6 months of lockdown was obviously an exceptional period for most people. However, during the whole, starting from DeMon to GST to RERA to then, INFS and COVID, we've seen people selling throughout these troubled times. However, a lot of things needed to be in place. So one was, I think, over a period of time, the customer confidence has to be there in the brand which they are buying into, which was lost for a certain period of time as far as the sector is concerned for quite a few developers. So hence, for us, the most important thing was looking at the person you are onboarding or the kind of developer who you're trying to transact with. Second, like I said, was the kind of in the kind of project we were looking at the stage that we came in. There are some developers where we have done transactions at the land stage as well, where we have helped them give money to acquire a land, or we have given money after the land was acquired and given some money as a cash out. So those kind of structures are also possible, which we have done. However, that would be a small part. The significant amount of our portfolio would be a mixture of a general corporate purpose loan, which means it could be a takeover of an existing debt or on an ongoing residential project, and a part construction funding. So most of which we call as project funding. So with about 70 to 80% of the portfolio would be centered around an ongoing residential project. Now, we've had certain checks and balances in terms of security. We ensure that we don't lend on development rights, for example, in a place like Maharashtra, where it is very prevalent to have rights on a particular land or a project by way of transfer of development rights and not have access to land. So wherever we have a situation like that, we ensure that we have an additional collateral so that, if there is a need for enforcement, you have proper rights on the project. We also ensure that at every point in time, our security covers are upwards of at least 1.75 times, so that, if there is which we did experience recently, if there is a change in the market, if prices have to come down, if costs have to go up, there is a buffer in terms of the value which we can realize from the project, as well as the loan which has been granted to the project. The major difference between the banks and what differentiates NBFCs over a period of time is the end use of funds. So as far as NBFCs are concerned, there is no restriction on the end use. We can still have a general corporate purpose end use for the funds that we lend to, unlike banks where there are very specific end uses which are prescribed by the regulator. So we are more flexible. However, that comes at a price. Most NBFCs would definitely be ranging from a 13 to a 16, 17% kind of a bracket in terms of their expectations of returns, depending on the risk that we are underwriting. However, I'd like to make a distinction. See, like most NBFCs, like you rightly said in JM, the company which I'm a part of is a focused real estate lending NBFC, right? So most of the NBFCs have a separate team which understands the sector and which deals with the sector differently from how a normal structured credit or a normal corporate lending team would work, because even in some banks there is a differentiated team. So most NBFCs has done that extremely well, right? So to have a separate team which looks at monitoring, there's a separate way of monitoring these projects, there's a separate way of underwriting, there's a separate way of risk management. So all those aspects are taken care of differently when we are lending to this sector. So that's pretty much what I wanted to cover. And is there anything I've missed out on, Ashish ji? Please do let me
No,
know.
no, I think you're very well covered. Actually, you have, I think, given the complete idea upfront the participant, how they can approach you, what kind of funding they can get and all. I think one thing which is missing in this discussion is the timeline, basically. So, generally, when the developer is looking for funding, they have this notion in the mind, it will take 3 months, 4 months, 5 months kind of difficulty. So when we are going to bank, the banks have different set of procedures, the committees are there, then principal approval, then the final approval. But in case of NBFC, the same timelines are working, or there is a different, so they can suppose because they are giving some premium on the funding, whatever they are getting in terms of pricing, interest rate. So they are looking that if they go to NBFC, they might get the fund faster than the banks. So your take on that? Ken?
No, so I definitely feel there is a time arbitrage between banks and NBFCs. There's no doubt about it, because there's a focused team which is working on it. Having said that, I think we do not have multiple layers of committees like most banks do have. We have one credit committee or an investment committee where all our proposals go to, where they are sanctioned or rejected. And these committees meet as often as once or twice a week, right? So our turnaround time can be much faster. Also, our due diligence processes, though we use the best in the title as well as the technical due diligence aspects, but I think the turnaround time, if the focus and everything, if the documents which we need are and the data that we require are available very quickly, it can be as much as about 2 months, door to door. So I think we can turn around faster. Provided the data, but our data requirements sometimes are much larger than what some banks may have. But if that is available, it's a quick turnaround.
Okay, thank you, Gitanjali ji. I think you have very well covered your part of the deliberation. Thank you very much. So now we have Amit Goenka ji, Amit ji, the MD and CEO of NIPCO Group. So NIPCO Group is mainly into the alternate asset investments or alternate investment fund. And I think he's running the NBFC also in the name of Nishas Finance. He has very good experience of working in the various organizations. So both on the consulting side, so I think he was with Knight Frank, then he was the founding MD of the SL Finance. So he has seen both the sides of the business, as a consultant, as the financer. And I think I was seeing the news yesterday that you have funded 2 projects, which was news in the newspaper. So congratulations to you that you are funding to the developer in this current scenario on a faster manner. So first of all, Amit, I think you have joined late actually. So welcome to you and thank you very much for joining with us. So Amit, we would like to understand from the AIF point of view, because I think it's a domestic AIF which you are running. So people would like to understand what is the appetite of the AIF in terms of real estate funding. And generally, what kind of structures you prefer whenever you are funding to any developer? And I think there is one notion I think which is very important to cover here. Basically, the developers which are in tier 2, tier 3 cities, so they are always coming to us and they are discussing that हमारे लिए तो कोई बैंक भी मना करते हैं और we are not getting funding from the NBFCs and the funds also. So for them, what kind of solutions are there? Because you see the market is not only in the urban cities or the major cities only, but India is basically a very vast country. So we have the developers which are in tier 2 and tier 3 cities also. They are doing very well actually. If you see, they are not leveraged. Their cost is very less. All these things, all ingredients are there. So we would like to understand from you on this part also. So over to you, Amit ji. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashish ji. Pleasure to be here amongst such an august panel. Mahesh ji, Yash, Gitanjali, known Yash and Gitanjali for a very long period of time. So happy to see you all guys. And I'm glad I heard all of them before. So it's made my job easier. I have very little to say. I think all ground has been covered by them. So that's good. And I don't think we have too much time as well. So I'll keep it very brief. I think we're already at 5:14. So I don't want to extend the timelines too much. But very quickly, I think there are effectively 3 avenues for capital from an institutional perspective. One is obviously the banking sector, of which the largest public sector bank is with us. The second, obviously, is the NBFC space, where Gitanjali has adequately covered what the NBFCs have done and continue to do. And third, of course, is the AIFs, which is where I represent that pool of capital to some extent. If you look at the total pie, housing forms 80% of the real estate pie in India, and of that, if you see also from the funding perspective, out of $80 billion, close to almost $40 billion has been invested by NBFCs and funds, which means gradually they've captured nearly 50% of the total fund outlay of commercial loans to the real estate sector over the last 8 to 10 years. So clearly the whole wave has been going towards more private capital than bank capital, and clearly that's really happened because of the speed of disbursement, the flexibility of capital, and some of the other factors that Gitanjali has already pointed out. So I'll elaborate that a bit. Also the opportunity as well as the constraints of the banking sector have been very clearly brought out by SBI. Manish ji has said that we can do funding at a very attractive cost, provided we get the following, and we can't do the following. Gitanjali has further gone and said that, well, we are more flexible than the bank, and of course she's right, because the NBFCs have that leeway as an NBFC. But again, they need a certain clip of money because they need to manage asset liabilities, and that is really where there's a certain amount of constraint which finally does not exist when it comes to AI fund. So AI fund is effectively a private equity pool of money. It's all equity money. There's no leverage allowed. It's largely all category 2 investors. And what that means is that we can structure our transactions in the way that matches with the cash flows of the project. So let's say that early on into the project life cycle, for the next 12 months, let's say there's not too much money which will come. Money largely has to go towards completion. So we're fine with that. We can sort of effectively, or not worry too much about returns in the initial period of our investment, and keep more back-ended returns. So a lot of our investments have effectively been in that direction as well. In terms of the quantum of money, again, there is no challenge. Funds like ours are able to do anywhere from 15 crores to 150 crores. So there's a very large spectrum of capital that can be employed by us. Anything less than 15 crores becomes suboptimal in terms of cost, both for the lender or both for the investor as well as for the investee companies. So that's effectively the range that we can play. In terms of the geographic mix, one is able to do most metro locations. And to answer your question, Ashish, as to why one can't do tier 2, tier 3, is because the amount of capital that you can deploy in one geographic location. Let's say you go to Raipur. Can I put 150 crores to work in Raipur? The answer is maybe no. Maybe I can put 15 crores, 20 crores, 25 crores to work there. Maybe 30 crores, 40 crores to work there across 2 or 3 projects. So the amount of capital that one can invest in a tier 2, tier 3 becomes very limited. For that capital to go in, then the monitoring cost, the geographic, engagement cost, the ability to be there, be present, and be able to monitor and engage, becomes a very big challenge. So one can't, most of the NBFCs and funds are present physically in one geographic location. So let's say Gitanjali and I are present in Bombay. Yeah, she's in Delhi, right? So unlike a bank which is present in every part of the country with their branches, their networks, their offices, funds and NBFCs don't have that. They can effectively present in a few cities. So one is we're limited by our infrastructural presence. The second is that there's not too much capital that one can put out, and there's an efficiency issue that happens once you start looking at other geographies. So no doubt that one can actually have opportunities in those cities, and they're very vibrant, especially I think post-COVID. And what Maheshji rightly described, people have gone back home. There's a lot more vibrancy. People are willing to go and buy apartments or second homes and other things so that they can actually and very efficiently work from home. I think that is a very, very compelling argument. But from a financial perspective, for institutions which are not geographically, physically present in all those locations, it becomes a very big challenge. So it's a constraint at our end, not the opportunity constraint. And again, one is looking to invest, let's say, $100 million. One can do effectively 4 cities, with $25 million each very easily. You can't put $25 million to work in a tier 2, tier 3 location very easily and quickly and expect, for it to work. So I think those are really the constraints at our end. Having said that, I think there's a lot of vibrancy now with the post-COVID scenario with the housing sector. I think all the fundamentals are already in place. The sentiments have also come back, which also means there's a lot more capital available in today's environment than was maybe available a year ago, maybe even 2 years ago, pre-COVID. So today, I think most lenders have come back. New capital formations are happening. We've seen very, very large funds announce new schemes. We've come up with two additional schemes because we're deploying money so quickly. So we are coming up with a lot new schemes. We've seen the larger boys also come out with schemes, and they're looking to even set up AIFs in the country, whether it's Apollo, whether it's KKR, and who have you, are also looking to set up large AIF platforms so that they can start lending. Also, the entire shift of construction finance is also moving to the AIF space because of the flexibility that AIF can offer. Of course, maybe slightly more expensive, but it's a lot more flexible. It's able to engage, it's able to get patient, it's able to get the right outcomes for the projects. Clearly, I think that's happening. The other thing, Ashish, you have to understand is that 80% or let's say about 65 to 70% of the value is actually coming from the metro locations. Only 30% of the value is coming from non-metro locations. So one is obviously more inclined to pay that 70% of the value pie than actually go and spread oneself thin for 30% of the value pie. So clearly, I think it's also that issue. And finally, I think clearly what Gitanjali highlighted is in the last 5 years, since 2016, there's been a huge paradigm towards the shift, especially post-COVID, towards consolidation. We started with demonetization to RERA to GST, and now of course the pandemic. So we've really seen a huge amount of consolidation in favor of the more corporate, the more organized, the larger players, which means that the opportunity set for the smaller players is now becoming as a subset to the larger players who are now becoming aggregators. So they will need land from developers. They'll need approval help. They'll need some amount of local licensing help. They need some amount of local push. They need local area management. So all of those value addition which a local developer can provide is really now becoming the opportunity for the local developer, which is where he's going to be able to extract value. And he is not necessarily going to be fundable. So the fundable opportunity set is really much smaller today than what it was maybe 10 years ago or 8 years ago, when a lot of NBFCs started to crowd the space, a lot of funds started to crowd the space. So that is not happening anymore, right? So now, having said that, the amount of money available in the country is not an issue for housing. I think there is a lot of capital available. When you look at data sets, as I said, there's almost $40 billion invested by funds and NBFCs. Another almost $10 billion of capital formation is happening. Swami itself is a 25,000 crore fund, right? And then if you look at all the other funds and NBFCs combined, that would be easily another 25,000 crore. So, you have a significant amount of capital which is now started to come back into play, and starting to support housing in a very large way. A lot of foreign funds have come in. A lot of stressed funds have come in and started to acquire assets, which means earlier the problem of stressed assets and assets being stuck because of issues with banks or with timing or environment or other idiosyncrasies within the asset class because of regulatory or other issues, I think are now getting addressed by the stressed asset funds. You've seen Oaktree do it. We've set up a stressed asset fund. We've gone and done a few transactions. So clearly, I think I think that is again a very big opportunity where there is value that can be now monetized. There can be value unlocking that can happen in real estate in today's time if there is value which is locked up. I think that is an opportunity that we can come in, and I think that's something we do very, very efficiently. Purely, if you have to look at the funding environment, and I will take a few minutes to quickly share a few slides, Ashish, so that I think for the people at large, I think they can also get a perspective as to where to find money, if not from banks and NBFCs, right? There can be other avenues of capital. So, if you can you see my slide?
Yeah, we can see.
Yeah, so I mean, there are about 5-6 avenues of financing, and Yash described the equity piece or the private equity piece, wherein you can raise private equity at a platform level, at an asset level, or a project level, depending upon who you are and who you can partner with. Of course, equity is available to maybe 2 to 5% of the market, right? So we have a few examples on the screen, and and of course Yash is partnered with a very 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 blue chip institution, great guys. So these kind of in global institutions are able to partner with developers, with platforms, and able to put in equity, and that's available to a very few set of people. But that equity can then start aggregating a lot of the projects under it. Like Yash described, we can acquire assets of tier 2, tier 3 developers. Good assets which are available can be turned around. So that becomes an aggregation under people who raised equity. So you need not raise your own equity. You can maybe partner with somebody or offer your assets under the umbrella of somebody who's gone and raised equity, right? So that's the first thing. When it comes to mezzanine, now there's a lot more opportunity set on the mezzanine space because a lot of players, including NBFCs like JM and a bunch of other funds, largely funds, for participating in the mezzanine space like ourselves. Wherein we can say, okay, you already have a lender, you have got construction finance, but you need money for other things, like you need to take out a lender. Like somebody is going to Swami, Now, Swami is not going to take out a lender. So, okay, I'm going to come and take out the lender and become subordinated to that and do some revenue sharing and asset sharing and take some security. So that's the kind of transactions we're doing, which is unlocking that value. So we can come into a subordinated situation. We can, do other sorts of structures which are more cash flow linked, which are more upside linked, which are more back ended, and be in a mezzanine situation. So I think that's an opportunity. So need not always look for a senior lender. You can look at a combination of senior junior lender. Where we can be a junior lender and they can be another senior lender. You start with a junior lender and bring a senior lender later as well. That's no problem. Then comes pure debt. Of course, then there's a lot of NBFCs, funds, and other participants which actually come into the debt space. Now there is enough and more capital available in the debt space clearly, and at various cycles of the life cycle of the project, as Geetanjali explained, right from closing on the land acquisition to actually delivering the project, or taking out a lender or taking out a partner, coming into a senior lender position. I think the fundamentals of all of these investments remain the same. There must be enough cover, there must be enough juice, both for the investor as well as or the lender as well as for the promoter. It cannot be only money available for the lender, nothing for the promoter. There must be enough skin in the game. There must be enough engagement. There must be enough competency. The project has to make sense and sell and get an exit. So all those fundamentals, I think, remain intact. One is not disputing that at all. If you were to further go down, there is also an opportunity for people to unlock value in existing land banks. So it may be hard for you, for example, to raise money, but maybe you have assets available. So you can take an LRD, you can take a LAP, you can take inventory financing in some other project, right? And you can use that money into a project which you want to get started. So that can be another avenue for you to actually go and raise money. And we are doing a few labs, and there are a lot of other NBFCs and capital that can do labs. One of the things that we are also encouraging very actively, something you've seen, is where you can get into barter. A lot of now contractors have got into barter in the last 12 to 24 months because they haven't seen cash flow coming enough. So they said, okay, let's do some percentage of barter. So having a supply chain credit and barter actually helps. So in fact, in some of the term sheets that we were doing, and because of the sentiment, so a few developers said, sir, ab to paisa nahi chahiye because we've entered into a barter, we've sold a lot of inventory, we've collected cash, so we don't need to borrow. So I think those combinations have really worked very well for smaller projects where you can do a barter, where you can raise some, very quick sales, and you can really go out and raise that capital. So I think that's that. And finally, there's a builder subvention scheme after the HFC subvention scheme was blocked. I think a lot of developers have said, okay, we're happy to sort of pay for your interest cost and things like that. So anything that accelerates sales, anything that you can do to bring confidence. Like Maheshji said, we can guarantee the delivery for grade A developers, right? So there are opportunities like that where you can create products and solutions to accelerate sales. You may have less money, but you can get a lot more sales by actually doing builder subvention kind of thing. So that's a little bit on what you can do in terms of trying to raise money. It's not just chasing or doing outside any of the funds or NBFC's doors. I think that's clearly an opportunity, but I think there are other opportunities too. In terms of what we can do, as I said, our pools of capital work across the spectrum of the opportunity set. So we've engaged in helping close a land purchase where there is significant amount of money already invested by the developer, and doesn't, these are smaller projects. It's not a township, but which can effectively then get delivered in 2 to 3 years. After having done that, we participated in taking out senior lenders and stepping in. We participated where we're coming in and replacing a lender, but still getting subordinated because there's a lot of cash flow, a lot of security, and a lot of cover available in this project. So hence, for 2 lenders to actually be in that position is not a problem. The blended average cost of capital still remains very attractive to the project. To partnering at partnering in redevelopment projects as well. So there's a lot of capital available to the project owners today because of the vibrancy in the market. People have gone back to looking at owning homes, then looking at renting homes. The ticket sizes have gone up. The ability to spend on their own home has gone up. The home loan industry has actually grown at a much faster clip in the pandemic than they've grown in the last 5 years before that. So in fact, there was a statement, by Renu Karnad, who said that, we've disbursed more loans in October last year than we've done in the last 5 years. So clearly, I think that home loan market is very attractive. It is driving demand. The euphoria for buying is very high, which is driving the interest for lenders and investors to actually come in and come into this. Now, the question one is coming is, what is the cost of capital? So clearly, there are 3, because the flexibility that you get there'll obviously be tiered cost of capital. So this is equity money, right? So let's say a bank is funding anywhere between 10 to 20, 10 to 12, 13%. NBFCs may be funding from 14 to 16%. Then obviously AIFs will try and fund at a slightly higher rate of return. So that's really how the stack up happens, where because it's equity money, it's willing to be patient, it's willing to get back ended. But what that means is that it may not necessarily need to pay a coupon or an interest every month or every quarter. You can actually be more back ended, which means you can be more equity linked than debt. So because of which the cost may be slightly higher than a bank or an NBFC because it's pure equity money. But what it does is it matches the cash flow. So there's no strain on the project. It's as if you don't have to sweep out the money from the escrow to be able to pay the bank and then let the project suffer. It is actually in sync with the project requirements. So clearly for that, there's a slightly higher cost of capital, which can be adjusted more on the profit side than on the upfront payment side. So I think that is how we offset a lot of these things. And of course, because it is very project focused, one is doing a lot of intervention like a partner would to ensure that the project becomes very healthy, starts showing very significant cash flows, is able to sell, is able to collect. A lot more confidence that is propagated in the market with a private equity or an AIF partnership. So those are things that one does to be able to bring out the efficiency in the capital that is getting deployed.
Thank you, Amitji. Thank you very much. I think you have done wonderful deliberation where I think you have covered everything from the fund point of view and the market point of view also. And the way you have given the presentation also, it is a very elaborative presentation also. Thank you very much, sir. I think we got, I think, a lot of information out of it. So, friends, I think we have already crossed the time limit actually. The topic is so interesting that we could not, I think, stop ourselves. So, I think now I would like to take one or two questions from the audience. So, one question quickly, we would like to wrap up this, Chikali. So, we'll take one or two questions on it. So, one is, the affordable housing under the definition of infrastructure is, so whether the affordable housing covers under the affordable the infrastructure status. I think anybody of you can reply on that. So
I think Mahesh ji is the best person to answer that because as a government institution, I think, or as a public institution, I think they are better equipped to answer how affordable housing, which is classified as an infrastructure sector, is better off in financing.
Well, as far as from bank's point of view, financing point of view, bank doesn't make much of difference in financing affordable housing or any other project. But it's being the priority of the government, we do have some consideration for the affordable housing. And the definition of, you want to tell me the definition of affordable housing or what? Or any concession which bank is providing?
They just want to know whether affordable housing covers under infrastructure category for the RBI.
Yeah. Any type of housing. If somebody is having housing of even a small house, like 1-bedroom houses, for us, that is also a project. In fact, we are financing to the builder, who is a commercial person. From bank's point of view, he is not affordable or non-affordable. Okay. He is a builder. He is a man of means. The affordable is for the purpose of the end user. Affordability or non-affordability. Somebody is making a house of a 1-bedroom or somebody is making a house of a 5-bedroom. It doesn't make any difference as far as the financing to the builder is concerned.
Okay, sir. Right. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. There one more question for Gitanjali. I think this is related to the size of funding which you are, minimum ticket size of the funding or maximum ticket size of funding.
So we are not very fussed about the minimum ticket sizes, happy to do anything upwards. So we've generally kept it at 50 crores plus. And I think the sweet spot will be around 100, 150, whereas we have the ability from a capital perspective to go up to even 600-700 crores. But our sweet spot would be 100, 150 crores per transaction.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. So now I would like to wrap up this session. So thank you very much. I think we got a lot many new structures or how the structures are working, how the different kind of lenders and investors are looking to real estate funds. But the ultimate outcome is that a lot of money is available for the real estate sector. It's not like that we are seeing the situation that money is not available, but the money is available for the right kind of project, right kind of builder also, and the right kind of location also. So if these ingredients are there, I think there will not be any challenge either from bank, NBFC, or the joint venture partners, or maybe the AIF. So these agencies are ready to support and they are ready to take the exposure. The cost may be different, maybe from bank may be the lesser charging the lesser cost because they have public money and they are having the tighter norms also. But the NBFCs are also equally helping the real estate sector, but their cost is a little high because they have to manage their asset liability. So liability is always on the higher side in comparison to the bank. And then the funds are, because the funds are basically taking the riskier bet whenever they are funding to the project. So definitely they need to have the premium also, and the investors who are putting money in the funds, they are also looking the higher returns. So across the world, I think this is the situation. So we had a good discussion. We would have good understanding also, and the participant also asked many questions. So I hope that we could I think beat out the purpose of the today's discussion, and the people who have attended this program, they will get some benefit out of it, and they can approach to the SBI or to GIM or the Nishas or maybe the yes also for the any kind of funding requirement. They will be helpful to you. So thank you very much. Thank you to all, and thank you all the esteemed panelists for their time. Of course, all are veterans from the industry and they are busy in their business, and many things are there with them. So some are, they have confirmed and they could come to this platform. And this is, I think, 87 webinar of the Resurgent India in last 1.5 years. So in the pandemic era, we have tried that people are sitting at home. They should how they can enhance their knowledge, how they can connect with the different participants of the market. So this is the journey which we are keeping on, and hopefully we'll keep it continue, and we'll bring the new topics, new subjects for you. So, so please continue with us and log in on our channel also. So thank you very much to all of you. I would like to thank you to all the participants who have joined here, and then lastly, I would like to thank you to my team or the Resurgent India team who had worked behind the show. So the people who are involved into digital division or the social media division. The Rohan, Lokesh, Deves, and the other team members who had done the hard work, because they are the hidden heroes. Actually, without them, it cannot be made successful. So thank you very much. Thank you to all, and I wish you all very
Thank you.
happy and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.